Hello everyone, Rob Rousseau here, just reminding you to please smash the subscribe button as well as the bell and the thumbs up, leave a comment, and hey, if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe over on Patreon, patreon.com/Rob Rousseau. Okay, that's all. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Okay, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show today, Carl. I've been looking forward to talking to you for a while, actually, so this has been a great opportunity to do this. Carl, of course, folks, is the host of the Silk and Steel podcast. So I'm really excited to talk to you about some of this stuff. And predominantly, obviously, the big news that has been happening over the last couple of weeks, you've been right at the center of a lot of this stuff, is Russia and Ukraine, the invasion of Ukraine. Sure. So when this kicked off, first of all, I was wondering, this is everyone that I've been kind of talking to about this. I'm wondering, were you surprised by what happened? I was certainly, as someone that was kind of loudly and confidently predicting that this invasion would not take place, because I'm very mistrustful of kind of Western media and the intelligence community and the national security community. I was very surprised. How about you?
I am right there with you, man. I was even making Twitter jokes about okay, when is Russia going to invade? I'm waiting online.
Yeah.
But I was proven wrong, like many people. I for a long time, I thought this is just some saber rattling, a high pressure negotiation tactic. Maybe I thought at most Russia would deploy troops to the Donbass region, kind of like what they did in Georgia war. I did not expect they go all out full scale invasion of Ukraine. So I'm wrong. I'll make my mea culpa right here.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, pretty much right up until the day that it happened, I was kind of doing the same thing. As many people came to remind me as I started doing these streams when this happened, many people came to ask me to apologize and do all this stuff. So yeah, it was a mea culpa for me as well. But one thing that happened, when this invasion went off, and I noticed with you, is you immediately kind of started doing these Twitter spaces to talk about this, which became kind of very popular right away. So I was just wondering, what made you want to get involved in this conversation? Do you have a particular interest in Russia or Ukraine, or was it more about just providing an outlet to kind of push back on the Western narrative that we're seeing about this?
It's a bit of both, because I have always been fascinated about post-Soviet space, but lately I'm getting a lot of questions either in my DM or Facebook. People ask me questions. What is China's position, right? And I was surprised, there's a lot of misconceptions. So I thought, okay, this is the opportunity for me to do some explaining. And I also, in my private chat group, in my Facebook with my friends, we talk a lot about the war. I thought, okay, well, with the Twitter space, I thought it would just be a small group of people. We would just kind of geek out, share information. What I did not expect how big it blew up. And at one point, I think we had 1,600 people listening in, and we got people from all over global South telling their perspective. That was really valuable experience for me, because you kind of validate that the Western media, mainstream media, actually represent a very small voice, among the global population. There are plenty of people all over the world, especially in the global South, that hold a quite different view than what's presented right now on CNN, BBC, New York Times, Washington Post, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's been really valuable for people to hear those voices, because it's really been relentless over the last 2 weeks. This narrative that's taken shape in Western media, in which kind of any sort of dissent, or even anyone that's, while acknowledging the horrors and the dangers about this current situation and trying to push back on that, but even acknowledging any of the context or any of the what has happened and the role that the West has played leading up to this, has been really shouted down. You're called a Putin apologist or a propagandist for even mentioning this stuff. So I think it has been really valuable.
Yeah, I'm not even that pro Putin. I know he's a kind of conservative autocrat, right? I mean, he's anti-communist. I mean, I'm not. I'm just quite amazed at the kind of the level pro NATO propaganda we've been swarming with, and
Yeah.
now we have people in Chicago, the Chicago, my second hometown, protesting on Michigan Avenue, demanding no-fly zone. This is nuts. I mean,
Yeah.
do these people even know what that means? That means literally they're demanding World War III.
Yeah.
I mean, no fly zone is not something like innocuous.
Yeah.
I
It's
mean,
not a magical spell that just makes it so planes can't fly over the country. That's not what it is.
Yeah, I mean, they name it no-fly zone for exactly that reason. You made it sound so like magical that oh, NATO just imposed a no-fly zone over Libya to protect the civilians. But what actually means is NATO move its plane there and bombs the shit out of Gaddafi's army.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah. So, and yeah, by the way, and also with some of these like pro NATO rallies where they're talking about no-fly zones, you also see a lot of of symbols of this kind of like ultra-nationalist Ukrainian movement, like flying the flag of the Ukrainian insurgent army, and these really brutal institutions that were responsible for horrific crimes during the Holocaust, which is totally being normalized right now. It's very bizarre.
I had a guy, Alex, came into my Twitter space trying to explain to us the fine line between the ultra nationalists and Nazi.
Yeah.
Like, if you need to spend a half hour trying to explain the difference, there's a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, like,
oh, these were simply nationalist, anti-Soviet nationalists, you see, and they only kind of helped with the Holocaust, but really it's not that big of a deal when you.
Yeah, I mean, like this is the Stepan Bandera. Even Nazis thought he was too extreme because not only he wanted to wipe out the Jews, he also wanted to wipe out all the Poles.
Yeah,
to create an ethnically pure Ukrainian state, and he did carry out some very gruesome massacres before when Nazis thought that he was too much and put him in jail. I mean, that's the kind of the person that has been rehabilitated by the West and by the NATO. I mean, in fact, if you actually look at the Eastern European history, a lot of these kind of ultra-nationalist Nazi collaborators have been rehabilitated since World War II. I remember one time I was listening to NPR. This is ages ago, maybe 10 years back. I was listening to NPR, and this guy is talking about his Lithuanian grandfather, like how he fought both Nazis and the Soviets in World War II. So I'm like, wait a minute, that something doesn't sound right here. And then he did say, oh yeah. Of course, when the Nazi first came, they, he had to work with the system. And then but he's really just a nationalist trying to gain independence for his country. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
So he fought with Nazis. Yes, he fought with Nazis against the Red Army. Okay, yeah. I mean, but then he made it like, again, it's a very kind of the liberal trope to draw like moral equivalence between Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, right? I mean,
yeah, horseshoe theory. Yeah,
exactly.
That's I often say this is kind of the bedrock that all Western propaganda is kind of founded on. We have the same issue in Canada right now with our Deputy Prime Minister, Chrystia Freeland, right?
Yes.
Whose grandfather was one of these people, one of these Ukrainian ultranationalists that is also trying to be rehabilitated, who was Michael Chomiak, who's a known fascist collaborator. This is like common knowledge. And she's trying to rehabilitate that as well and rehabilitate this whole movement. And in fact, when people have pointed this out in the past, like, your grandfather that you often talk about being a big inspiration for you, that you draw, who's like inspired you to do the things that you do and kind of help create this nationalist Ukrainian identity. He was an actual fascist. Like, that's actually bad. And she said, no, that's just Russian propaganda. It's the same kind of thing.
This is like Mussolini's granddaughter trying to rehabilitate Mussolini, except like everybody know who Mussolini is, right? Not many people are aware of the history of, say, the Ukrainian insurgent army. And then and all the horrible thing they committed, war crimes they committed during World War II. And but yeah, it's quite amazing that like lately, a lot of the images that's coming through the Western media, like Reuters and Getty's image, they even NATO, they posted on International Women's Day, they posted a picture of Ukrainian women fighters. Oh yeah, women make up 15% of the fighting force in Ukraine, and the women they just chose to include is wearing the black Nazi black sun symbol on her chest. And I'm glad so many people caught that. It's just
they deleted it. They actually NATO deleted the tweet about this. It's incredible.
I mean, I at least they had some sense. I mean, like, NATO. This is, I mean, if you could look at the history of NATO, right? That you had the actual Nazis serving as NATO's spring commander. So I mean, it has a history there. But yeah,
absolutely.
At least they realize, that okay, maybe it's not cool. Maybe it's not cool to post Nazi symbols.
Yeah, I mean, what you're describing, I mean, I found it so bizarre because there's so many examples right now of Western media promoting and uplifting these like ultranationalist or like overt fascists, like the guy on PBS with the Bandera picture in the back of his interview, and it's really bizarre because it's just like I actually think
he's not just a guy who put a Bandera picture. He's the mayor. Neo-Nazi. Like there was a 2015 article from I think J Post, Jerusalem Post says, oh, the town that particular town where he was at, the Jewish residents were shocked, and neo-Nazi was elected the mayor. So I double check to make sure it's the same guy. It checks the name. Oh yeah, it's the same guy. It's the same guy that appeared on PBS.
Yeah,
it's the same. And even in the 2015 article, it says this guy, he replaced the Ukrainian president's picture in his office with the picture of Stefan Bandera. And of course, that picture is there visible in the PBS interview. They just blur it. I don't know if he blurred it or if PBS blurred it, but you can still recognize, Stefan Bandera.
It's really bizarre. And like people are pointing out in the chat, Stefan Bandera's grandson is literally a journalist in Canada covering this conflict. Canada's a central part in all this, and but this whole like Ukrainian nationalist identity we've got in this country because of the role that Canada has played in sort of helping to create this nationalist diaspora of Ukrainians. We've got monuments to SS divisions in Canada for people that helped, these Galician SS divisions that helped carry out these huge horrific crimes. It's very strange, and this is something I've been talking about for a while, so it's been very strange to see this start to kind of kick off and see people start to talk about this.
I mean, it's a joke among people say, oh, all the Nazis fled to Latin America, like Brazil, like Argentina, etc. But the other side of the story is a lot of the Nazi collaborators and real Nazis, in particular from Eastern Europe, ended up in U.S. and Canada. And he was under the auspice of the U.S. government back then, because these people, because they're anti-communist. So they're okay. We take them in. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what you're describing too has just been very bizarre, because like, in my opinion, like when Putin talks about this neo-Nazi issue in Ukraine and kind of frames this invasion, which is harming like civilians and harming, ordinary average people that have nothing to do with any of the context or NATO or any of these, or the Donbass or any of this stuff, or Azov Battalion. And he kind of talks about this denazification process. It's incredible because it feels like the West is contributing to this narrative more than they're pushing back on it. Like, I don't believe actually that Ukraine is just overrun completely with neo-Nazis, and that but it seems like the West is like engaging in more of this Putin propaganda than like someone like you or I ever could. Like they seem determined to like prove that this is actually correct when it's not actually accurate.
And you have people like trying to prove scientifically, by percentage, it's only a small minority that's actual neo-Nazis or Nazis. But ignore the fact that usually it's a small vocal minority that get empowered by none other than NATO to take power, especially, after the Euromaidan in 2014. I just saw a video clip of the leader of the ultra right wing party, neo-Nazi parties, Svoboda, I think it's called Svoboda.
Yeah.
He was talking. There was a video clip of him talking about Euromaidan. He said, "Oh yeah, like they all say, oh yeah, the us ultra nationalists is only a small portion, but guess what? We did 90% of the work.
Yeah,
if
the
it
numbers
wasn't
don't
for
matter."
us." Yeah, he said if it wasn't for us, the Euromaidan would just became a gay parade.
Yeah.
He said that. I mean, this is so like yes. The Nazis and neo-Nazi groups are a small minority among the Ukrainian population, but these people are who the NATO's empower and put in power after 2014. And Putin is of course using this as a justification for his invasion of Ukraine. But what he's also said was not wrong, because he said, look, yes, a lot of countries have a extreme right-wing problem, including Russia. But guess what? We don't include neo-Nazi groups in our regular army. We don't do that. Whereas, Ukraine, they have the whole Azov battalion, the openly Nazi paramilitary that got incorporated into the Ukraine military. And they are the ones who are prominently featured right now in a lot of photos that's coming out of Ukraine war by Western mainstream media, until people keep on calling them out on it with their Azov battalion badge plainly visible in those photos.
Yeah, well, and that's another thing too, because people say, oh yeah, of course, why are you focusing on this neo-Nazi issue in Ukraine? Obviously there's neo-Nazis in Canada, in America, definitely, of course there's neo-Nazis in Russia, like you pointed out. But I mean, that's the big difference. Not only that they've been folded, like officially folded into the military establishment in Ukraine, but also that they're being armed and trained by the West, by NATO, which is that's just a documented fact. The Canadian government has been sending weapons to these folks for now years as they've been engaging in this regional conflict in the Donbass, and
they're being openly lionized, not just in Ukraine, but all across Western mainstream media. All their pictures, those Nazi fighters' pictures, splash all over the place. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, well, and this is one of this big contradictions about this invasion is, as much as Putin has used this as a justification, used this kind of real phenomenon as a justification, it's been actually a huge gift to the Ukrainian far right. It seems like they're being even more empowered by the fact that this invasion happened. They're getting more arms and support, and they're getting more diplomatic support and more. They're, like you pointed out, they're being lionized by Western media. It seems kind of like it's having the opposite effect in terms of this denazification idea.
Yeah, kind of makes sense, because average people like us, we don't want to fight, right? I mean, it's always the extreme group. They have plenty of people who are willing to fight, and those are the people that the NATO just decided, okay, it's worth to these people we're going to empower, because these people are going to stick it to the Russians, right? And because that's what they prefer to average people who rather maybe just live and let live. But no, they want the most extreme groups in power, armed, so they can continuously poking the bear for the just for the purpose of NATO bureaucracy, basically. What's the point of NATO after Cold War? I mean, the whole existence of NATO was to contain Soviet Union, but after the Soviet collapse, even Russia wanted to join NATO, because they so wanted to be accepted by the West. Putin, when he became prime minister in 1997, 1998, he actually, asked to join NATO, and of course he was rejected, and the West, instead of taking Russia in as an equal partner, they keep on aggressively expanding NATO's border all the way to the Russia's border. So all that is for what? Is that to expand European security, or is that to preserve the NATO bureaucracy so all these bureaucrats can keep their jobs? I mean,
Yeah, and like what you're pointing out as well, like people, when people have raised this idea of, well, it kind of seems like, judging from what is going on right now, that the West is actually trying to encourage this kind of insurgency. They're trying to escalate this conflict and turn it into an Afghanistan. You have fucking Hillary Clinton on MSNBC being like, oh yeah, it's going to be just like Afghanistan with the Mujahideen, which we all remember how that turned out. And people kind of point out that it seems like this is the goal of the West, and that gets pushed back on as being some kind of conspiracy theory, but it's not really a conspiracy to point out the long history of the West engaging in this exact behavior all over the world, in Central and South America, and in Eastern Europe and all these different places, arming these extreme right groups in order to destabilize their enemy. And this is a pattern of behavior that's been going on for decades. So I don't think it's a conspiracy to point that out.
Yeah, I don't think it's conspiracy at all. I may have to look it up, but I'm pretty sure some U.S. official openly stated, they want to trap Russia into a quagmire in Ukraine. Like you said, just like Clinton said, wanted to be like Afghanistan for Russia. They wanted to bleed Russian to the last Ukrainians, right? I mean, what is Ukrainians for life to them? They're just, Ukraine just a sacrificial lamb. They never intended to accept Ukraine into NATO. They rather Ukraine keep this kind of ambiguous status where they can just keep on flooding weapons into Ukraine and to support most hardcore elements in the Ukraine society, so they can keep on go to Russian bear, right? And now when the Russia lashes out, now this is a perfect opportunity for them to continually fight Russians to the last Ukrainians.
Yeah, no, you have this really bizarre phenomenon that I've been pointing out where, it seems like there's a potential sort of deal that's being offered here where Russia's saying, like, well, this invasion can stop as long as you agree to enshrine neutrality. If you recognize these Eastern republics, if you recognize Crimea, this whole invasion can stop. And then you have, like, you see this online, and then you have all these people in the, like, not even Ukrainians, but people in the West being like, fuck you, Putin. No way, no deal, Putin. And it's like, you live in suburban Pittsburgh. Like, what does that have to do with you? Like, this doesn't even affect you.
Exactly. I mean, okay, so yes, like Russia demand might seem harsh for if you're Ukrainian, but like that's what negotiations are for, right? You give and take. You settle down. You come into to agreement. You compromise, and after end of the day, what is wrong of turning Ukraine into a neutral country like, say, Switzerland or Finland? The Finland was Finlandized during the Cold War. Was that so bad? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah.
But of course, I do think Putin overplayed his hand. Now Finland is applying to join NATO, which is really which it's quite unprecedented because Finland is a lot closer to say St. Petersburg, heart of Russia than even Ukraine is. So they're going to have a bigger problem.
This is the issue. It's like, not only is there this huge human cost to this invasion in terms of the people that are dying right now and the refugee crisis that's happening. Yeah, it seems like a lot of these goals are becoming less likely and not more likely. Or the idea of having actual peace, it seems like it's becoming more difficult to achieve rather than less difficult. Galvanizing support for these neo-Nazis and galvanizing support for NATO across the world. It's been like you said, I think it's an issue of overplaying their hand significantly.
I mean, it plays right into the hands of U.S. because now U.S. got European Union lined up behind them. They shored up solidarity within NATO, and Germany even sacrificed its own economic interest because Germany really has a lot of business in Russia. They rather keep their business ties, but because they have to choose a stand, they have to show solidarity. They withheld the certification for Nord Stream two pipeline in the middle of the winter, to just so like and right now there's talk of boycotting Russian oil and gas. I mean, the biggest loser, I mean, is of course Ukraine, but then the second biggest loser is the Europe as a whole, and U.S. is actually beneficiary because this is so far from U.S. soil. We can just here cheer on the war, and then keep on providing weapons, and everything is working. And like now, U.S. can make sure just the fear of Russia is gonna drive the rest of the European country to line up docilely behind U.S. policy. I mean, yeah.
Okay, well, so I mean, I've definitely set the table for this conversation. So people have been asking you. You mentioned at the very beginning, like when this was kind of starting, people were asking about the Chinese perspective. So I wanted to talk about how China does fit into all this. They're kind of the country that is encouraging diplomacy and trying to de-escalate. I know a big part of modern Chinese foreign policy is like respecting borders and sovereignty.
Yep.
And it seems like what they're trying to do is walk this line between recognizing Russia's legitimate concerns here about NATO expansion of the West backing these nationalist militias, while also recognizing that Ukraine is entitled to security and sovereignty as well, and trying to strike this balance. Like, would you say that's accurate, or how do they fit into all this?
Yeah, I mean, China actually have friendly relations with both Ukraine and Russia. I mean, China managed to do this, with a lot of adversarial countries. Like China has friendly relations with Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Israel at the same time. I mean, the one way China does that is by its non-interference policy, right? It's like, okay, your business is your business. We don't ask about your domestic business, and let's just do business together. And for China, territorial integrity and sovereignty is an important issue that, especially that concerns you can be applied to China as well in case of Taiwan. Right, because one of the conditions to establish diplomatic ties with People's Republic of China is you recognize there's only one China, or the Beijing, the PRC government is the sole legitimate representative of all of China, including Taiwan. So they don't look very favorably upon like separatist causes. So even today, China still haven't recognized the Russia's annexation of Crimea, for example, even though Crimea did a referendum to join Russia, and it's very unlikely that China will recognize the independence of Donbass, the Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic. So that's what China meant by respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, just 24 hours before the war broke out, he actually said, all countries' sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected. That includes Ukraine, right? And then then to everybody's surprise, Russia did this full-out invasion. And so at the same time, though, because Russia and China has maintained a friendly relationship ever since 1989, a lot of people in the West, they still have this image of Sino-Soviet split stuck in their head. But that's actually over by 1989 when Gorbachev visited Deng Xiaoping in Beijing. That was and ever since, Russia, Soviet Union and its successor state, Russia, maintain a very good relationship with China. But the difference is that initially in the early 90s, both China and Russia they actually prioritize, even though they may have very good relationship with each other, but they prioritize having friendly relationship with the West. Both of them reach out to the West trying to build better ties. But but West responded with relentless NATO expansion to Russia's border, and on China's hand, they continuously try to contain China in East Asia. That started not least with the 1999 bombing of Chinese embassy in Belgrade during the Kosovo War, and then that escalated up to 2001 Hainan spy plane incident when Donald Rumsfeld asked to increase the spy planes flying around China's coast, and that led to one U.S. spy plane colliding with a Chinese fighter jet and forcing the U.S. spy plane to land in Hainan Island. At that time, I remember the tension was super high, but it all changed. It only changed because 9/11 later that year, and then U.S. attention just focused elsewhere in the so-called Great War on Terror in Afghanistan and Iraq. And then after U.S. after 10 years of that, U.S. suddenly realized China has emerged as a great power, and then under Hillary Clinton's turn as a Secretary of State, the U.S. did a so-called pivot to Asia, and it was a pivot from Middle East, and it was not an economic pivot or a cultural pivot; it was a military pivot. And so, since 2010s, we hear about so-called the tension in South China Sea. U.S. need to maintain freedom. What they call it, the freedom of navigation patrol in South China Sea to keep South China Sea open, right? With implying somehow China is about to blockade South China Sea, when in reality 80% of the shipping going through South China Sea is to and from China, right? So U.S. Navy essentially was claiming to keep the sea lane opens for China and to protect it from China, right? I mean, basically, if you think about it, that's what they're saying.
Yeah.
But so all these activities, of course, increased tensions, and that drove China and Russia ever closer together, and that's what we ended up today. Like China and Russia are basically kind of de facto allies at this point, and China is not willing to see Russia fall, because they know if Russia falls to NATO pressure, they're going to be next in the crosshair.
Yeah.
So it's not in China's interest to see Russia get significantly weakened out of this conflict, and that's why they are sort of throwing Russia as the economic lifeline amidst of the Western sanctions.
Yeah, that's been the kind of interesting thing about this moment and following along their position, because I recognize it is a difficult position where they have this, they've kind of been pushed by Western belligerents to form this very strong partnership with Russia. But it's not totally ideological. Like it's a way to push back against Western hegemony and sanctions and all this stuff. Exactly. But it's not like it's the USSR. It's not like Russia's out there trying to spread socialism or working class solidarity or working in the spirit of international cooperation. It's an interesting circle that they have to square this circle.
State.
Yeah.
I mean, despite what most 80% of Americans probably think Russia is same as Soviet Union, but Russia today is actually fairly anti-communist.
Yeah, and Putin made this clear in his speech before this invasion.
Yeah, exactly, but Russia and China's interest is not completely aligned, because Russia's strategic priority is Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, and China's strategic priority is along its coast, particularly Taiwan. And if it's up to China rather their stability on the Eurasian continent, so they can get on with their Belt and Road Initiative. The whole point of Belt and Road Initiative is China is trying to build the Eurasian land bridge through Russia to reach the EU market, right? And now Russia and Ukraine particularly Ukraine is turning into a war zone. All the airspace has been closed, right? And that's definitely not good for business. So that's why also China probably wishes this conflict get wrapped up as soon as possible.
Yeah.
And that is why you also see China calls for negotiated peace settlement.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's like I've said, every government in the West is just seems like they're trying to escalate. China's kind of the one country that's trying to be the adult in the room and try and end the conflict. And I'm not sure they're kind of going to get any kind of credit for that. Okay, so you mentioned Taiwan as well, and I was wondering, how Taiwan independence fits into all this, because people are now sort of predicting, people in the West are predicting that this is a signal that China is going to try something similar, try to invade Taiwan. And of course, while there are some similarities with the West backing Taiwan and arming them, it's also historically, it's really different. You mentioned the one China policy. So you've got this weird kind of stance that the West has to take, where they're arming Taiwan and kind of using Taiwan as a wedge to destabilize China, while also de facto recognizing that there is only one legitimate government in Beijing. So how does Taiwan independence fit into all this? And do you think China has any plans to how does reunification fit into it?
Right. So first, let me say Taiwan and Ukraine is a very different case, because Ukraine is actually a sovereign country.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas Taiwan, there's nobody in the world recognize Taiwan as an independent nation. There's about a handful of countries that recognize the so-called Republic of China on Taiwan, right? Which is different from saying Republic of Taiwan. That's a big difference.
Yeah.
Right. And so at least nominally, the Republic of China, claims to be the government of China. That's everybody know that's a formality at this point, but at least nominally, Republic of China still claim to be China, right? Not independent from China, and so that is a crucial difference. And of course, most of the countries in the United Nations do not recognize Taiwan, and for China's point of view, it's quite different, because for a strategic calculation in Russia's case, I kind of, I'm shocked by what Putin did, but I kind of understand the rationale behind it, because the West has been continuously pouring money and weapons into Ukraine to build up Ukraine's military capability, and there's a sense that if Russia doesn't act now, a few years down the line, you'll be too late. And in a way, the current progress of the war kind of validate that Putin's rationale, actually, because we've seen Russia's, in Russia is kind of has been somewhat bogged down in the last in the first week of the war. They haven't made a lot of progress around their main target. I mean, initially it looked like they're going for a decapitation strike against the capital, Kiev, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. And so in a way, the progress of the war, or the lack of progress on the Russian push, kind of validate Putin's rationale that Ukraine's military is actually shaping up his capabilities. But on the other side, on China, mainland China and Taiwan equation is quite different, because back in 1950s, during the beginning of the Cold War, when the kind of the standoff between Taiwan and mainland China first started, back in 1950s, government on Taiwan, the KMT government, actually was running blockade of mainland China, because back then PRC didn't have a navy. So the whereas the KMT had a navy that was built up from all the ships that US gave them through the land lease agreement. And they were, KMT was still doing bombing runs on Shanghai in 1950. And they hold a whole series of offshore islands. They were doing things like privateering. They're hijacking Soviet trade ships that go into China and hijack all the sailors and hightail them to Taiwan and force them to defect to the West. I mean, that's the kind of stuff they were doing. Even like British flagship from Hong Kong, they were hijacked them on the high sea. So, but that the tides start to turn. When mainland China acquires its own navy, build up its own air force with the help of Soviet Union, and and in 1980s, when I lived in China as a child, back then, the Taiwan's, they don't have complete air superiority anymore over Taiwan Strait, but they still have better fighter jets, because U.S. was supplying them with F-16s, whereas whatever mainly China had wasn't a match. But now, since 1980, 40 years later, the equation, the calculus is completely different. Militarily, mainland China pull way ahead. They both in quantity and quality, and the economy of mainland China is still growing. So to give people an example, back in 1980s, Hong Kong by itself constitute somewhat is like about a third of GDP of entire China, right?
Yeah.
And today it's like 3% or something, like in single digits, 3% or 1%. I mean, back then Hong Kong's economy, Taiwan's economy is many times bigger than Taiwan's economy many times bigger than Hong Kong. So both in economic and military terms, mainland China is growing stronger and stronger by the day. So time is on Beijing's side. They're not, unlike the Russia-Ukraine situation, China is not in a hurry to resolve the Taiwan issue militarily, because every day China's position is growing stronger, and there's more economic integration now across Taiwan Strait. 40% of Taiwan's exports go to mainland China. There's over 1 million Taiwanese live on the mainland. So like that's what China has been counting on for the last 40 years or so. I mean, the worst tension between across the Taiwan Strait was actually back in 1958 during the Kinmen crisis, when both sides exchanged artillery fire to the several hundred thousand rounds were exchanged in matter of days, and during that time the U.S. Planners actually had an actual plan to nuke China. They did their plan. If they thought if China was going to not even taking Taiwan, they're taking this offshore island of Kinmen, which is only like less than a mile from the Chinese mainland. If People's Liberation Army is going to take the small island of Kinmen, U.S. was willing to nuke China, and the only thing that held them back is they thought maybe Soviet might launch a retaliatory nuclear strike against U.S. base on Taiwan and Okinawa. But in the end, they decide that's a price they're willing to pay. Kind of like now they're willing to fight the Russians to the last Ukrainians.
Yeah.
They thought, okay, fighting the mainland Chinese to the last Taiwanese is a price they're willing to pay. But in the end, Mao did not order PLA to cross the water to take Kinmen. So that crisis passed. That's 1958. That's before China acquired its own nuclear weapons. And so today, not only is the shelling has stopped, now you can fly directly from Taipei to Shanghai, and before COVID pandemic, a lot of hundreds of thousands of mainland tourists visit Taiwan every year, and then vice versa in the other direction. So the people to people exchange was already happening. There's already a lot of economic integration. So time is on China's side. China is not in a hurry to resolve the Taiwan issue militarily. I mean, even from a purely military standpoint, to organize amphibious landing on Taiwan is an operation that that's so huge in scale that will make Normandy D-Day look like a child's play. I mean, to gather that amount of troop concentration and the vessels that needed, it's going to be plainly visible through satellite, like how we knew Russia put all its military asset along Ukrainian border like a month in advance, right? We would know if China was doing troop buildup across the Taiwan Strait. Right now, we don't have any indication of that, right? So I can say with 100% certainty that PLA is not going to cross Taiwan Strait today, tomorrow, next week, or next month, because it's going to take a few months just to build up the troops. And so it's not, unless this Russia-Ukraine crisis drags on beyond that, I mean, it's not like China is going to be, even if China wanted to, it's not like China is going to be able to take this time to just send its troops over, because it's going to take them a month to prepare. So that's just objectively speaking from a military point of view. But China has no intention right now to cross the Taiwan Strait.
Okay. Another big facet of this is, and this is something that we've been talking about on this show. I know you've been talking about this, but the ways that China now is starting to work with Russia, and as well as countries like Iran, Nicaragua, and countries that have kind of been under the boot of Western imperialism and hegemony, and kind of trying to create this alternative global economy to get these countries off of the US dollar and to limit the ability of the West to destroy these countries with sanctions. And do you think this incident has hastened that? Like, it seems like now that there's this massive sanctions regime being put in place over Russia to try to destroy the Russian economy, it seems like this is all kind of coming together faster than how people planned to.
Definitely. Actually this is a very recent development, because for the longest time China was perfectly fine working with a US-led world order, because China profited from globalization, right? I mean, China's growth in the last 30 years is a testament to that, and China is perfectly fine to abide the so-called international rule-based order. But it's the U.S. in the last, especially since Trump came to power, has really, tried to lock China out of that world. And in response to this, U.S. attempt at decoupling U.S.-China economy, China in 2015 started its own so-called the SIP system as an alternative to the SWIFT system, in anticipation to the day when U.S. will use its financial hegemony to punish other nations. But again, the problem is adoption. There's a reason U.S. dollar was the world's reserve currency since World War II. One, because U.S. has the world's largest economy. Two, U.S. In 1970s, U.S. worked out a deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil in dollars, and other oil producers followed suit. That became known as a petrodollar. So that is the basis of U.S. dollar status in the world, and it's just easy for other nations to join in existing framework, right? So even after China created this alternative payments settlement system, SIPS, alternative to SWIFT, the adoption process has been slow, because why adopt this completely new system when you can just use the current system, right? But first, U.S. did the SWIFT sanction against Iran, right? And then now they're doing the SWIFT sanction against Russia. So essentially, U.S. is pushing these countries to adopt China's alternative system. Because even
it's a weird strategy.
Exactly. I mean, even in the beginning of this year, there has been talks about de-dollarization and settlement of trade, bilateral trade in local currency for a long time. But even at the beginning of the year, only 17% of Russia-China trade was settled in yuan. I mean, that's already a big jump from 2014 when Back then it was only 4%, but still that's 17% is still a small fraction. But now the swift sanction of US is basically forced majority of Russia-China trade going to be trade settled in yuan, right? In Chinese currency and using China's SIP system. And now, and also it's also not just for Russia and Iran, but for other countries as well. They can see that US can at any time, if you run afoul of US foreign policy, the US government can use their financial strength as a weapon against you, you know. So in essence, US dollar is no longer a safe haven currency, right? How can it be safe current when the rug can be pulled under you and get your asset freeze and then like Russia's central bank asset and then get your pull you out of the SWIFT system. So that this is definitely going to speed up the de-dollarization trend that was started a while back, but now it's going to accelerate and pick up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, I know it's getting late for you, so I don't want to keep you too much longer. Thanks for sticking with me. Throughout this interview, it's been really great to talk to you. Just the last thing I want to ask you about, which is that just that you in particular have been kind of on the front lines of this kind of information that's going on right now with the whole new Cold War situation, which really seems like it's been kicked into overdrive over the last 2 weeks, and it's gotten a little bit alarming and scary. And I was just wondering, like, how you're feeling right now as this situation develops, and as it seems like this whole new Cold War situation seems to be accelerating a lot and getting a whole lot worse. Like, are you nervous about where this is going, or like, what's your general feeling about where this is all headed?
I'm not nervous, because I still think that the primary objective, the prime directive of the U.S. decision makers is to continue their grift of the military-industrial complex, and their self-preservation. You know, a sense of self-preservation is just as strong as the rest of us. Nobody really want to have a nuclear exchange, right? So, and if I'm wrong, then we're all dead. So don't worry about it. and so I'm not worried about further escalation into a nuclear apocalypse. I mean, you can kind of see that in the actions. Like the U.S. First, Blinken said, "Oh, we greenlighted our NATO partners to provide weapons to Ukraine." By that he meant Poland to provide MiG-29 to Ukraine, and then Poland's like, okay, how about this? We will give our MiGs to the U.S. You will give those planes to Ukraine, and then
they're like,
whoa, dude, that's not cool. I mean, this became a hot potato. Nobody wanted to act like, everybody wanted to do some grandstanding, you know, like to act tough, but nobody actually wanted to really go for a nuclear war, right? Or bear the brunt of it. So I'm not worried, but at the same time, I feel like I'm kind of being pushed to kind of counter the disinfo, because my original intent starting my broadcast was just trying to share my knowledge and my love for the Chinese culture and history, and the political part was, I felt like I was kind of pushed to it, because the Chinese state media sucks ass at countering the Western propaganda. I mean, just like today, I did a Twitter post. Somebody just showed me the actual Facebook page of CGTN America. This is a Chinese state media, right? The CGTN is a China Global Television Network. CGTN America, I look at their Facebook. They're like totally one-sided in this Ukraine Russia crisis, even though Chinese government's official policies stay neutral. But this Chinese state media, right? And they have been posting stuff like, oh, what is a no-fly zone? No-fly zone is where is usually used to protect civilians, you know, by by establish a air zone where you can shoot down the enemy enemy fighters when they come into the zone. I'm like, okay, like you guys are nuts. You guys like this. You guys are running totally counterproductive to the official.
Well, I'm sure they see the way that RT and Russia state media is just being banned left and right. So it's like they probably realize that they do have to walk this line if they don't want to have if they want to have access to these markets.
Yeah, but I look at their engagement numbers. It was like, I'm sorry, man. If you just want to be like avoid Russia RT's fade by stay irrelevant, then you're doing a good job, guys. I mean, but I mean, U.S. China is pouring into billions of dollars into these state media and have nothing to show for it. I mean, I'm just annoyed because a lot of people come to me to ask me about the real situation in China, because the Chinese state media, whose job is to tell the story of China, is not doing a good job of it, and so I was compelled to share what I know, my own personal knowledge, and so yeah, I mean, like. And then at the same time, I was just radicalized by all the disinformation I saw out there, and all these.
I feel the same way, about the work that I've been doing,
And I'm even more radicalized when all these think tankers, who are paid by U.S. State Department, who are paid by arms manufacturers, accusing me of being a shell, of being a paid shell for the Chinese government. It's like, look, man, like if Xi Jinping wants to pay me, then he better hurry that check.
I'm doing this stuff pro bono personally.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree.
Xi Jinping, if you listen to this, make sure that check come through. Otherwise I'm gonna turn Chinese dissident. With Steve Bannon and go into full COVID conspiracy territory. We'll link up with Falun Gong, right? that's where the real grift is. I mean, the Falun Gong, this cult, is receiving funding from United States government for their media empire and media outreach. It's a crazy, crazy story.
Yeah, and here in the West, our grandma and grandpas are getting this delivered to their door, and that's how they're getting their information on China from these papers.
Yeah, I used to wonder. I'm like, I know Falun Gong cult, but I there's no way like their limited followers could support this their multi-million, if not multi-billion-dollar media empire. And then it was only in 2018 when I interviewed independent journalist Yasha Levine. He told me he filed a Freedom of Information Act, and he found out that back then the U.S. the BBG, Board of Broadcasting Governors, which is a U.S. government agency, was providing fundings to Falun Gong's media outreach. And now they renamed BBG to U.S. Global Media Agency, which supports RFA, VOA, all these U.S. And they just the Congress just approved another $500 million budget to provide to the U.S. Global Media Agency for Global Media to provide more funding to RFA, Radio Free Liberty, Radio Free Europe, and all these propaganda channels. It's amazing.
And it's interesting who gets that state affiliated media tag and who doesn't, and like the way that the language works with that. It's very, very fascinating to me. But Carl, again, it's getting late. I know it's getting late for you. Thanks again for joining the show. It's been really, really great to have you talk about all these issues. I really appreciate you taking the time. Would you like to just like plug your podcast, or let everyone know where they can find you before we sign off here?
Oh, yeah. So I'm pretty active on Twitter. Now my life pretty much just consists of shit posting online. So I tweet a lot. You can find my Twitter handle is just my name, Carl Za. Carl spelled with a C, and then my last name, ZHA. So Zorro Henry Apple. And then you can also find me on YouTube. I do have a YouTube channel where I host a lot of free content of my Silk and Steel podcast, which is primarily focused on China and surrounding regions, history, culture, and politics. But check out my Patreon, because that's how I support myself and my family on the island of Bali. So on my Patreon, I have a lot of the subscriber only content, premium content. A lot of I'm currently running a series on Chinese Civil War. So I believe I'm the only kind of the English language podcast that's focused, that's carrying a comprehensive coverage of the Chinese Civil War. I think I'm right now. I'm doing a series on the Manchurian campaign. I think I'm now up to the spring of 1947. So and then I'm also doing like couple concurrent series. I'm doing a series on the opium trade and in Golden Triangle in northern Myanmar. That's how the CIA supported the KMT remnant army who fled mainland China into northern Myanmar to turn the northern Myanmar into the so-called Golden Triangle. It was the world's largest producer of opium and heroin before NATO occupation of Afghanistan. So how it's funny how that always happens when the CIA gets involved. Soon the opium production goes through the roof.
Yeah. It is interesting, and you can see why they were very not very happy about the whole withdrawal from Afghanistan a couple months ago when that was kicking into gear.
All this money off the books, like all the
they got to fund those black ops somehow. Exactly. Shout out to our CIA friends. They're going through a hard time right now. Thanks again, Carl.
Thoughts and prayers. Prayers up. CIA friends.
That's right. So thanks again. I really appreciate it, Carl. Chat wants to let you know that you rock as well. Chat really appreciated the conversation. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And you're welcome back anytime. I'll talk to you soon, I hope.
Okay, talk to you later, Rob.
All right, take care.